For more interviews on educational technology and for a list of our educational technology workshops, including those at Science Leadership Academy this month, please visit www.edtechlive.com. To join in the discussion on School 2.0, please visit www.school20.net.
SLA was never a laptop school first. It was an inquiry-driven, project-based school with 5 very strong core values, and the technology that we use supports those core values. When we change from thinking that our job as teachers and our jobs as schools is to cram as much information into the kids' head, but rather say we have to be co-creators of this information with kids. We've got to teach kids the skills. We've got to teach kids to use this information. We've got to teach kids to be powerful, careful, and critical consumers and producers of information and content. The fundamental job of our schools as we move forward into this new era is to teach wisdom. They can get the information. Wikipedia, Google, you name it. The information's out there. Now the question is it so blinding and so bewildering and such a Tower of Babel that unless we realize that our job is to teach kids what to make sense of this world, how to critically analyze what they see out there, and how to do something with it, then it doesn't matter what we do with the technology. We can't be complacent in education. The stakes are too high. And I get the fear. I know the fear. And God knows I walk that line every day as an administrator, and as an administrator of a new school where it just feels so fragile because we're just building it. But I've made a commitment that the fear of what could go wrong can't stop me from doing what's right. And I think that we as educators need to just embrace that idea. How many teachers, after teaching, 7 hours a day where they had one prep and a 40-minute lunch, can go home and realistically read 1,000, 1,500 student pages? Let's get teaching loads under 100. Let's have teachers teaching fewer classes and planning more, and giving them time to collaborate, and giving them time to think, and giving them time to assess authentically so we're not stuck looking at multiple choice tests. Do that, and we will change education. We have had so many parents come to us in our first year at SLA and say, I don't know what you're doing, but my child for the first time in their life bounds out of bed and can't wait to get to school. Our school doesn't start till 8:15, but the kids are already there at 7:30. We throw them out at the end of the day at 6 o'clock.
Hi, this is Steve Hargadon, and welcome to EdTech Live. It's Thursday night, December 21st, 2006, and my guest is Chris Lehmann. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Chris, could you tell us a little bit about your background and what you're doing right now with your new school?
Sure. My background is that I spent 9 years actually, at the Beacon School, which is a wonderful progressive public high school in New York City. I was a technology coordinator, English teacher, girls basketball coach, and a teacher administrator there. And being in New York in that time was really just incredibly exciting because it was really sort of, I think, the cutting edge of school reform and progressive schooling in the country. And what I was able to do as a technology coordinator is really take Beacon and take the vision of the directors, which was really building a school with a focus on arts, aesthetic, and technology infusion into all classes, and help them to move that vision forward. And it was just an incredibly exciting time and a great time. And I took all of that and all that I learned there, working both at Beacon, working as a staff developer for other schools, running workshops for teachers, and just being in that really amazing world for a long time. And went home to Philadelphia, where I'm from, and have had the opportunity to start the Science Leadership Academy as its founding principal. And SLA is, funnily enough, a small progressive public high school with a focus on technology infusion across the curriculum. And it really is an attempt to sort of build from scratch in Philadelphia a school with similar visions, with then some very powerful differences, as what we did in New York, and sort of take what has become known as the 21st century school model or the School 2.0 model, and really see if we could implement it from the ground up, which has been just incredibly exciting. And we're sort of, let's see, September, October, November, December, about 4 months into that experiment.
And how's the experiment going?
It's a blast, I would say that we are doing better than we have a right to be doing. I, of course, because a perfectionist, always look at where we want to be going and see that we're not there yet. But in any sort of, I think, realistic expectation of where we should be by now, I'm really quite pleased. Which isn't to say that we haven't had our struggles and we don't ask a lot of questions. We don't constantly sort of say, well, is this what we want to be doing? But no, I think so far, so good. The kids really understand that there's somewhere that is different and special, and have sort of bought into this vision in really meaningful, cool ways. And that's just exciting to see.
Chris, how many students are at SLA?
Well, we start with just the 9th grade, so we only have 110 students. And, they are the first class, and they are helping us build, and they're sort of co-creators of this vision right along with us.
It is a public school.
It is a public school. It is a special admission school, which, oftentimes gets called a magnet school. We want to sort of redefine that term, and that is we do a lot of outreach talking about what kind of school we are, what kind of values we have, what kind of work we do. And then instead of just looking at grades and test scores, we actually interview every student that wants to come, and we don't pre-screen their transcripts. We really let anybody give us a call and schedule an interview. And the kids sit down, they have to bring a project that they did in 7th or 8th grade, a piece of writing, something they've done for a science fair, who knows, it can be anything. And they present that to one adult teacher or administrator and one student. And our current students actually help us pick the next group. And the notion is by sort of doing that kind of different kind of admissions process, it allows us to cast a wider net and maybe grab some diamonds in the rough who, for whatever reason, don't have a great test score or are missing a grade or two or something like that. But when we meet them, we really say, wow, this is the kind of kid that we think can do really well here. And that allows us to get a really vibrant group of kids is the goal.
Chris, there's another school that started in Philadelphia this year at the same time. Mm-hmm. How do the two schools compare? School of the Future. There's number one. There's 4 schools that opened up this year. There's the School of the Future, which is the partnership school with Microsoft. There is us partnered with Franklin Institute. There's Constitution Center High School partnered with the Constitution Center, and the Academy at Palumbo, which is a small school model of the Central High School model, which is an old and revered school here in Philadelphia. As far as how we're compared to the Microsoft school. They've got a nicer building and a better gym, which is to say that they have one. Shirley Grover is their principal. I think she's an incredible innovator. I really respect her and respect the work that she does. Their schedule looks different every single day. I've said to some people that if we're trying to reinvent the wheel, they're blowing up the car. And there is a lot that is similar. We both have a focus on project-based learning. We both have a focus on sort of reimagining what schools can look like. I think that we are different. Our student population is a little bit different. They are much more of a neighborhood-based school, whereas our population comes from all over Philadelphia. And then I think at the end of the day, we are working within what I would consider to be a couple of strands of very familiar movements, the School 2.0 movement, the Progressive Schools movement, the Math Science Schools movement. And I think when we sort of mix those up, you get something that is very unique and very original and very new. But people from any of those movements would walk into our school and say, oh, I recognize this, I recognize that. I think that what School of the Future is really trying to do is something that looks remarkably different from just about anything else you're going to see out there. There may be a couple other models, but not many. Are they using any of the same tools that you are, the Moodle?
No, they are. Their partner is Microsoft, and Microsoft is working with them to design a lot of tools, and we don't have that partnership, and we are more of an open source model. And so we're using Linux as our server and running tools like Moodle and Elg.
to do the things that we're doing. We run a Mac platform as our one-to-one. They run a Windows platform as our one-to-one. And I think that that's good for Philadelphia to have two one-to-one models that are so different, and that can really show that it's not necessarily just about what, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what computer you use, it's about pedagogy and about how the teachers implement it and about what your goals are for how the kids and the teachers and the adults use it. So, so the tools that we're using are the same.
So you're using Moodle, you're using ELG.
Mm-hmm.
Are you having your students blog?
Yeah, they are just beginning to. Blogging and podcasting are starting to come online. One of our English classes are doing some blogs with around the Odyssey. Our biochemistry, 3 of our biochemistry classes are going to be launching their websites, both using iWeb and ELG, actually in combo. And those should go live in January. Our student poetry group is about to publish some podcasts, and our student newspaper is about to go online with ELG as well. So the answer, yeah. And I think that the whole school, at the end of our first semester, which will be in late January, is going to do a reflective blogging using ELG, where we sort of step back and ask ourselves some really powerful questions, and I'm really looking forward to that piece of the puzzle too.
Chris, you personally blog, right?
Mm-hmm.
How long have you blogged?
Oh, God. A number of years now. I want to say it's got to be at least 3 or 4 years now, I think. You could look in the archives, and it was originally hosted on Beacon's old server, and then I moved over to my own domain, Practical Theory, which, interestingly enough, I bought a gazillion years ago saying, someday I'm going to want to use this, and then had to renew it once or twice with never having used it. And I said, I know that someday I'm going to use this, and then sure enough, the opportunity came.
What you're saying is that you bought it when it used to cost $40 a year to buy a domain name.
I probably did, Ted Nellen, who is an old edutecher in New York, and Greg Basile, who also was in New York and is now Senior Vice President of the National Academy Foundation, we had this idea to start this peer-reviewed journal called Practical Theory. And we had 1 or 2 issues that we just hosted on Beacon, and back then hosting a domain was actually a pain in the neck. So we bought the domain and then never really used it, and then I just always kept it saying, I know this is going to come in handy one of these days.
Has blogging made a difference for you personally?
Oh, God, yeah. Personally, it's made a difference, simply in the amazing friendships that I've been able to develop with, folks like Will Richardson and Dave Warlick. Those guys I've met in person. They were on the committee they were on our curriculum committee. They came to our conferences and really made a big difference with the Philly folks. And they're just folks who I can call and bounce ideas off of, to say nothing of Chris Long. I've made a lot of nice friends out of the process. So on a personal level, it's been great just on the community that I've been able to be a part of. It's nothing of all the folks, I could spend probably the next 45 minutes talking about the people, all the bloggers that I bounce emails around with Tom Hoff. If I start trying to name names, I'm going to forget people. But, I'm now literally thinking of all the people that I'm neglecting, and to any of them that are listening, please, I apologize now, and I'm very sorry. I am a jerk. So, so there's this incredible community out there so just on a purely sort of enjoy your life personal level, there's, that. 2 is, I always tried to journal from a sort of enjoyment of your own professional practice. I always journaled. I didn't do it as often as I'd liked. But the funny thing about blogging is that because it's this sort of public journal, and there are always those journal entries that you can't publish, I think every educational blogger has at one point or another sort of stared at the face of the blog post you cannot publish. But because there's so much to write that you can, and because, people are reading, you actually, for me, it forces me to write more often. So this notion of reflective practice, which I really try to embody in my own craft, that I wasn't always great at, blogging became this wonderful avenue to sort of push myself towards a truer vision of that. So I think it's made me a better teacher, a better administrator. then there's the whole how it's helped SLA. I mean, in the whole planning year, much of the planning process was, if not 90% of the planning process was transparent. When we had a curriculum conference, we posted the documents online. When I had an idea, what would it look like if I did this? I posted it online, and people read, and people wrote back with ideas. Even as far as what questions should I ask in an interview. Some of the questions we eventually ended up using came from bloggers or readers who said, hey, I think a progressive school should always remember to ask this question. And, that's powerful. And I think that SLA, one of the things that I think sort of has captured a lot of people's excitement about SLA is that it really is not only School 2.0 in the notion of how the kids use it and what it looks like day by day, but in the very planning process, it's a blogged school. And there's a lot of people sort of poking their head and looking on the inside. I've said to Shirley Grover over at School of the Future, she should really be blogging, and she, you have to really commit the time to it, and it's a tough thing, as we all know. But I think one of the things that this little school that nobody expected to be on anybody's radar in any sort of real sense is on people's radars just because they feel part of the process, and that's because of the blogging.
I hear a baby in the background. Are you okay?
I'm good. He's getting a little fussy, but I think a pacifier will do the job for a little bit longer anyway.
Well, I guess I appreciate the transparent aspects of the blog and the way that it's created a virtual community. The thread I'm interested in following a little bit is that as blogging has been transformative or engaging for you, that in some ways is going to lead you to try and provide that as an educational opportunity for students.
Sure, absolutely. The hard part, this goes back to sort of what I said earlier about, looking at the holes and looking at the donut is, I wish that we had been blogging from day one? Sure. Part of it was getting Elgin Moodle to integrate was a pain in the neck, and we're getting there. The hard part is that, you can only sort of introduce so many tools at once. The teachers and the students grasp onto Moodle and are writing behind the Moodle firewall constantly. The conversations that are happening online, both in classroom forums and then school-wide forums, are incredible. And then, we're sort of dipping our toe into that blogging water and getting out there and doing that and seeing that. And absolutely, it was wonderful when, I published on Practical Theory that some of the kids were blogging, and a bunch of readers of Practical Theory went and checked out the students' blogs and left comments, and the kids were like, oh, wow, someone from Australia wrote in, someone from, England wrote in, someone from, Arkansas wrote in. So the kids began to see the power of that, and, we are publishing more and more and more of the work, and I do think that, knowing what it has meant for me to write for an audience, you feel that energy and you feel that power, and you make the connections you make as a blogger, and it's really sort of, I think, criminal to think that you would deny your kids that. But, again, the hard part is you can't do everything the first day you launch, and we're getting there. And I think that by the time we present at NAC in June, we'll have some amazing examples of some student blogging and some really powerful stuff to show.
Chris, there are a lot of people who would say, for 20 years, we've been promised that technology would change the nature of the classroom. What makes today any different than the last 20 years?
Nothing. On one level, right? And that is technology doesn't change the classroom. Pedagogy changes the classroom. The way we teach changes the classroom. What we have today in the technology tools and in the laptops that we can give the kids today for low cost, or moderate cost anyway, are incredible tools that support a progressive, project-oriented pedagogy. But unless you have the pedagogy, it doesn't change anything. You can give kids laptops and you can have really nice word processors, and that's great. And the kids will use them in amazing ways because kids are doing great things. But teachers have got to figure out how to use it, and administrators have got to work with teachers to do that. And until we do that, we can throw as much money as we want at it, but until the pedagogy comes first, the technology really only serves whatever is being currently done. We need to think about the technology in ways that it supports progressive pedagogy. I've known teachers and administrators who've tried to do it the other way, who've been progressives but haven't been in a progressive school, and thought that if they introduced the technology, it could be the tail that wagged the dog. And certainly there are some neat experiences of very traditional teachers getting their hands on the technology and changing. But it's a whole lot easier when you've got a really clear pedagogy first. SLA was never a laptop school first. It was an inquiry-driven, project-based school with 5 very strong core values, and the technology that we use supports those core values. And when you do it that way, then I think we can say these tools are powerful enough. The price point on them is coming down to the point where it is sustainable. The information out there on the internet is rich enough, and the kids are using it already, such that to deny the kids the use of it is really criminal. But when that pedagogy, when we change from thinking that our job as teachers and our jobs as schools is to cram as much information into the kids' head, but rather say we have to be co-creators of this information with kids. We've got to teach kids the skills. We've got to teach kids to use this information. We've got to teach kids to be powerful, careful, and critical consumers and producers of information and content. And that is the job of our schools. The fundamental job of our schools in as we move forward into this new era is to teach wisdom. They can get the information, Wikipedia, Google, you name it. The information's out there. Now the question is it so blinding and so bewildering and such a Tower of Babel that unless we realize that our job is to teach kids what to make sense of this world, how to critically analyze what they see out there, and how to do something with it, then it doesn't matter what we do with the technology. We've got to make that fundamental headspace change first, and then the technology will take us to places we can only dream of.
So there's been, a lot of talk this year, and even in the last couple of weeks.
I'll get off my soapbox now, by the way.
Well, no. The reason for the interview is to put you on a soapbox. There's been a lot of talk, and especially with the Time magazine back-to-back issues, of school reform and the kinds of things that you and I are talking about. But there are those who would say that there have always been early adopters of technology in the school system, but bridging that chasm to the regular teacher will be incredibly difficult. Do you see that changing in any way? Are these technologies compelling enough that they could somehow provide a platform for some significant changes in schooling?
I hope so. And yet at the same time I was speaking to a principal the other day, and I mentioned a student had published their work up on YouTube, and the principal said, "What's that?" And I sort of, my jaw dropped. So, on one level it's strange. We sort of, you and I, and the folks probably listening to this, live in a rare air. Will Richardson, every now and then writes about how this is becoming an echo chamber. We're all writing to ourselves and listening to each other talk. So sometimes it's easy to forget that there's lots of folks out there who aren't doing this stuff. Because, the rosy scenario version is, of course, yes, this can change. The interesting thing is that, you've got to be, at this point, I'm 35 years old and had email in college. And I had a fight to get it, but really at this point, if you're 32 years old, you had email in college. We are bringing up a generation of teachers and administrators who will have been raised with this stuff. So it's going to change one way or the other. The hope is that it doesn't take another 20 years to change, and by then, of course, the technology will be completely different anyway. But I think a lot of this stuff is compelling. I think our kids are using this stuff. When a kid's cell phone can broadcast a lecture on YouTube, whether the school network blocks it or not, people are going to realize stuff's going to change. This may be naive on my point, and I confess that if it is, so be it. We can't pretend that schools only happen within our walls anymore. They just don't. The world's transparent now. We can publish it with the click of a button. You can publish with a cell phone. You can publish with a computer. You can publish with, the number of devices that are Wi-Fi enabled now are just, everything is Wi-Fi enabled. If schools continue to pretend that world doesn't exist, they're going to die. And so I think that there are enough smart, savvy people out there that they're going to see the snowball start to move. We're going to see people say, wow, this has changed. They're going to see people go, what can my students do when I give them the chance? And, I think the thing to remember is that educators, while occasionally stubborn and all the rest of it, just like everybody else in the world, went into this to help kids. Teachers went into this job. Very few folks out there went into this job because we get our summers off. It's just not worth it. The vast majority of teachers out there want to be great teachers, want to help kids, want to see them become the best versions of themselves that they can be. And when they see the kids bringing the technology in, it's going to drive some of this. And also they're going to see what they can do with it. Very few teachers. At Beacon, we had teachers who came in and believed in progressive model but never looked at a computer before, and within a year or two, they were having their kids do documentaries. It's possible. We need administrators to support it. We need school districts to change some of their policies. We need to stop imagining any technology innovation in a school and saying, what's the worst thing that could happen? Imagine what it would look like spun badly on the front page of the local newspaper and then denying ourselves the opportunity to do it because of that worst case scenario. That's got to happen at district level, at administrative levels, at principals levels, so that we unshackle the hands of teachers and kids and let them do the things they can do. I think when that happens, we'll see change.
Some of that's got to be driven just by the fear that the parents will sue the school or the district.
Sure. Fear can't drive us in education. I always joke around that I've got my resignation letter on file for the time, like, dear Mr. Vallis, thank you for the opportunity. I'm very sorry that fill in the blank here happened, fill in the blank here. Thank you for this great opportunity, and I wish you well in all your endeavors. Love, Chris. And I joke around about that, but unless you're willing to go out on a limb, unless you're willing to embrace change, unless you're willing to sort of just be a passionate advocate for what our kids can do in this, both in new ways and in old ways, then what are you doing? We can't be complacent in education. The stakes are too high, and I get the fear. I know the fear, and God knows I walk that line every day as an administrator, and as an administrator of a new school where it just feels so fragile because we're just building it. But I've made a commitment that the fear of what could go wrong can't stop me from doing what's right. And I think that we as educators need to just embrace that idea.
Well, if you're willing, I'd like you to describe, I know you have gone through one set of tough circumstances, and you actually had the students help you solve it. Are you willing to describe that?
Sure. I'll do it in the sort of broadest based sense as possible just because it's, student identities and what have you. But, yeah, we had some students. Sorry, I needed a drink. The soapbox gets thirsty. We had some students misusing iChat, classic sort of cyberbullying stuff. They had created some identities that were not their usual iChat identities and were IMing kids in ways that weren't appropriate. They were doing it now. Our kids have iChat on their laptop, so the kids do iChat during class, and they're learning how to manage that, and that's a whole other set of issues. That's kind of a fascinating one. But this was happening during class. A couple of them, one kid thought it would be really funny to IM a teacher while the teacher was using their laptop and projecting it onto a screen, and you can imagine what they wrote, and So we found out who they, and we didn't have remote desktop on the Apples yet. We were re-imaging them, and it was a point where we didn't have the sort of ability to immediately look and see the screens. So we didn't know who was doing it, and the kids were getting upset. It was definitely destabilizing. Kids were spreading rumors and gossip and And then on our Moodle spaces, the kids started talking about it. And some kids said, here's the block function. Don't forget to block these names. Here are the 5 that I found. Here's the this, the that. And they started solving the problems themselves. And they also spoke to, what should be the consequences to this. And the kids were like, we want there to be consequences. We want people to be held accountable for their behavior. And, of course, some kids jumped immediately to they should be thrown out of the school. Or some kids jumped the other way. They're going to take our laptops away. Oh, my God, And, the teachers wrote in and I wrote in, and we sort of worked with kids to say, all right, what does it mean that we have these laptops? What does it mean that you're allowed to have a chat session open in a classroom? What does it mean that some kids are misusing that? What does it mean that the vast majority of the community hates that it's getting done that way? And then we also, in the meantime, were working to try and figure out who these kids were, who were misusing. I mean, we did eventually find them, and they were punished, and they were on in-school suspension and had to write a 10-page paper on cyberbullying and lost, privileges of their laptops for a while, and then some other consequences. But the funny thing is by the time we had captured them, the kids had sort of figured out enough of the technological solution that it had actually calmed down already. And so the community sort of took some course correction, and with the adults sort of steering the ship and helping guide the questions and the content, the kids did an amazing job, especially for ninth graders, of really critically analyzing the issue and analyzing their own behavior in it and analyzing what they wanted out of their community. And that was kind of cool to watch.
Are the parents involved?
Yeah. Yeah, and for the parents, I would say that it's been a really difficult education for the parents. What do you mean my kids, can iChat while they're doing their homework? And, one parent sort of, and I would say all the ninth graders, when they got it, went crazy on instant messaging, and they just went nuts. And all of them sort of had to learn how not to have 75 conversations when they're supposed to be writing an English paper or a science lab. And they all sort of quickly, some quicker than others, quickly learned how to manage that. But there was this wonderful moment the other day. A parent came in and was talking about iChatting, and this was a parent who, in the first couple of weeks, was like, why is this even on the computers? These shouldn't even be on the computers. And I had to point out to them, look, we can't block every website that allows you to chat. We might as well put a program on there that allows them to do it in our community and But for parent conferences, they stopped by my office, and he said, it was amazing. I walked into my kid's, room the other day and saw the iChat windows up and was all ready to say, why aren't, you said you were doing your homework. And then he asked me to look at my son asked me to look at the iChat messages, and he was collaborating with 4 friends on a project via iChat. And it was the parent going, I'm starting to see some of the pedagogical powers of this. And that was a cool thing. And also for the parents to realize these kids are going to have these tools. They're going to have them in high school. They're going to have them in college. They can't not have them. Hopefully what we're doing by being transparent about it, by talking about it, by working with the kids on it, is we're teaching them in ninth grade how to use it responsibly so that it does not dominate their lives and they don't become iChat addicts in college or whenever else or in high school, as we see happening all over the country, just where kids have computers in their homes. And the parents really are coming around and coming on board to that, and they really like that. And they love, of course, that we did a little Moodle hack so they can enter in their kids' student ID number and get all the homeworks, and they love that feature. They love getting the emails from the school with the announcements. And they're actually now pushing us to be able to try and hack Moodle a little bit more. I am dying for Moodle, for the next Moodle upgrade that has the parent role, so the parents can have an ID that is linked to their kids and can go in and see grades and things like that. Just because I haven't had the time to hack that in Moodle. So the parents are coming along with us. And one of the things that we want to do in the winter and spring is have some some home and school association meetings where we teach the parents how to use the laptops and what the tools the kids are using and what YouTube is and what MySpace is and why it's important to give the kids a school version of MySpace that is safer and more protected and observable, and use that to help the kids navigate the spaces that aren't school space, which they're all doing, whether they have a laptop from the school or they just have a computer at home or they can just go to the library anyway.
I started to teach my own kids and some of their friends the tools of Web 2.0. And then I made a list of everything I wanted to teach them, and I'm just dumbfounded at the volume of material that I would like to help them learn. There's just so much.
Oh, yeah.
So rich.
I admit I'm not a wiki person. I use Wikipedia all the time, but we've done, a couple of my teachers are playing with the wiki feature in Moodle, but we're not doing a ton with wiki creation in SLA. Partially, again, there's only so many hours in the day. You know what I mean? Like, there's so many tools and there's so much to do, and yeah, it's bewildering how fast it's all changing, and it's even for sort of those of us who are out there on the early adapter line. You pick the tools you love and you kind of use them. And you're aware of everything else, but you recognize you just can't use all 700 tools pedagogically. It's too much. It's too much too fast. At least in the first 4 months of a school, and not everybody needs a wiki, not everybody needs a blog, not everybody needs a this, not everybody needs a that. And you hope that if one teacher loves wikis, another one will love blogs, another one will love podcasts. And in a school community with a bunch of really innovative teachers who see how it changes their craft, by the end of a 4-year experience, the kids will be exposed to tons and tons of tools. But yeah, if you try and do it all at once, you end up making a muddled mess.
Chris, would you give me your definition of School 2.0?
To me, School 2.0, again, starts with a progressive pedagogy that recognizes that the role of schools has changed. School 2.0 is the recognition that the role of schools today is to teach kids to navigate an ever-changing world, technologically, online and off, to have the skills they need to adapt, to create, to judge, to synthesize, to analyze. School 2.0 recognizes that standing in the front of the room and cramming facts down kids' head doesn't work anymore. That it's got to be about teaching kids, again, to be, and I think it's that phrase I used earlier, critical consumers and producers of the information around them in all disciplines. You got to, that's it at its root, and it is this grounded in this progressive pedagogy that says the teachers don't have all the answers. Teachers do amazing things. They can teach wisdom. They can teach skills. They can teach writing. They can teach math. They can do all of those things. But at the end of the day, we can't assume that we have all the answers. We've got to teach the kids to find the answer, to take a core set of skills and find rich, powerful answers that are out there in the world for themselves. And they can do that, and they can publish their answers, and they can publish their ideas, and they can publish their opinions. And School 2.0 recognizes that the walls have broken down. School 2.0 is a transparent school. School 2.0 doesn't have walls to it. It recognizes that this is something that happens all day, every day, and that when we invite the world in rather than shut it out, we create communities and institutions that are authentic, that kids recognize as real and as caring, and that kids recognize as valuable to their own existence and their own lives.
Does the concept of becoming a self-learner play an important role in School 2.0?
Yeah. I mean, I think it does. I think that the fear when people hear School 2.0 and all the rest of it is that notion of the kid staring at their computer screen. So on one level, yes, it does, but I think that teachers still play a huge role in guiding and directing that learning and nudging and pushing and cajoling and, again, that notion of teaching wisdom. I think the other thing that becomes really important in School 2.0 is this notion of community learning, that a group of people together can create, what makes Wiki so great is community learning. It's community consensus building. It's community agreement upon definitions and ideas and what have you. And I think that when you try and build that notion of a community consensus around what it is we learn or the way that we learn or the things, the experiences we have, that's when School 2.0 also becomes really powerful because it's not just what the teacher says it is. I mean, obviously, 2 + 2 is always 4, and, the Declaration of Independence was always signed in Philadelphia, and da-da-da, but what those facts mean and how we interpret them to create meaning is not just about self-learning, but it's about community learning as well.
Well, maybe self-learning is not a good phrase because it's not self-learning, but it's engaged learning.
That's right. And the notion of being a really engaged, it's hard, right? I mean, and this is one of those things that on a beautiful spring day, and I consider myself to be an incredibly engaged learner. Someone used the phrase that, schools, the new idea has got to be not just K-12, but K to gray, which was a clever little term that I heard somebody use a while ago. But on a beautiful spring day when it's about 65, 70 degrees out and the sun is shining, I'd rather be outside playing, ultimate than inside learning also. I mean, we can argue that, playing a sport is learning and but the point is all of us have the moments when we embrace our inner slacker. So this notion that walking that line between that which we want to do and that which we have to do still exists. And I don't think we should be so naive to think that if we just kind of open all the floodgates and take off all the safeties and, let the kids just kind of find their own engagement and go, that it's just going to work. I mean, and I know that the free school movement does that with some really interesting success, and Brooklyn Free School is an amazing place. But I think there still is, again, that role for the adults of sort of managing the engagement, pushing kids to go further, pushing kids to go deeper and discover new things about themselves, and pushing kids to do the work even when they don't want to, because the fact of the matter is that with everything we do, there are moments when we don't want to do the things that we probably should, and engagement needs a nudge. So while I think engagement is a huge part of School 2.0, I think that we also need to remember kids are still kids and they're still people. And part of keeping them engaged is occasionally pushing them to the moments when the sort of gumption lacks.
So I interviewed Cheryl Nussbaum Beach. Do you know Cheryl?
Absolutely.
She called that rigor and passion.
That's right. That's exactly it. I used to say in my English classroom, on a beautiful sunny day, we all have to be here, so let's find a way to make it really engaging. Given that we've got to be here, let's do something that really is worthwhile. Let's not waste each other's time. And I think that that's kind of a neat kind of way to look at it. It's like, we got to do this, and let's do it in ways that are meaningful and powerful and engaging. And yeah, rigor and passion, I think, is a lovely way to put it.
Chris, who are you watching? Who are you looking to that you feel is doing neat things in this area?
Oh man, I mean, just open up the blog roll, right? Anytime Bud Hunt posts something, I'm reading it. Anytime Will and Dave post stuff, I'm reading it. Anytime Jeff Utrick posts stuff, I'm reading it. I love checking in with my old colleagues back at Beacon, seeing what they're up to. And again, I think it depends on, because I see myself, or CSLA, in sort of different strands, I love to look to the progressive schools movement and see how they're defining project-based learning, and see what they're doing with rubrics, and seeing what they're doing with authentic assessment. I mean, I look at the work of Doug Christensen in Nebraska that now has an NCLB-compliant statewide performance-based assessment graduation standard that is just a thing of beauty, and to me should be a national model. And I think, God, that's amazing. And then I look at what people are doing with technology infusion in the classroom, and I try and marry those different things. So I look to the progressive schools movement. I love to see what the Coalition of Essential Schools folks are doing. I love to see what Doug Christensen is doing. I love to see what George Wood is publishing. I love to see what Debbie Meyer is publishing. And then I look to, again, the technology folks. I love to read, Will and Dave. I love to read Tom Hoffman. I love to read Jeff and Bud. And I look at those folks, and then I try and look at the magnet school movement and see what I can glean from, the math science stuff. I mean, I was able to go out to IMSA last year, the Illinois Math Science Academy, and my God, it was an amazing place, and just an incredibly creative, bubbling cauldron of smart kids, that are just doing unbelievable things in an environment that is one of the most learning-rich environments I've ever seen, and try and capture stuff that they're doing. And again, I don't necessarily know that SLA has any one thing that we do that is truly original. Hopefully the sort of mix of those different movements in education, mixing those movements together is something really original. But I look at all those folks, and actually I'm reading right now, the book's upstairs, and I can't remember the author's name, a book called Education and the Cult of Efficiency. And it was written 45 years ago, 1962, sort of articulating how in the early 1900s, about 1900 to 1930, business practice sort of dictated to education how schools should run. And we lost, if you look at that sort of schism between the Dewey model and the sort of Charles Taylor scientific management model of schools, this author traces it to that moment in time, and reading about how schools have to remember that businesses don't have all the answers for schools, and we shouldn't just assume that a lesson in business translates, seamlessly to education. I mean, this was being written in '62, and now we've got the Gates Foundation folks saying that, let's end school in 10th grade because it's, they're not learning anything more they need for the workforce then. And I mean, I'm reading this book going, and just screaming and yelling as I'm reading, which makes it not fun for my wife, but because the lessons I'm learning from this book are as applicable today as they were 40 years ago.
I had an interesting reaction to there was a Business Week article on the Gates Foundation efforts, and I think the article did a fairly good job of pointing out that those who are involved in that work are admitting that they don't feel like they have really been successful yet.
Right.
I don't know if that's still the case, but I read that and I thought, well, from my standpoint, it seemed it was very interesting to see that they were using what might be called sort of traditional business mindsets applied to education. And I thought, people have a lot of different beliefs about what makes schooling effective. If I go to a Jewish day school, or I go to a Lutheran school, or I go to Catholic school, or I go to public school, or I go to charter school, they may have very different beliefs, but they are driven by a set of beliefs. And just being driven by a set of beliefs in and of itself is powerful.
Yeah.
And I so there sort of felt to me like there was at least in the description of the current efforts of the Gates Foundation, that it wasn't really driven by a belief in education, and
right.
that without that it would be really hard to actually accomplish what you would want to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think that. I think it was driven by the notion we need to fix something, and you need to define what's really going on, and you need to sort of say, well, what is it that you want to do? And I think that the Gates Foundation folks are interesting folks, and I think that there are some people within it that believe passionately and strongly about education. There's some amazing things they've done. I think that drawing any one conclusion from the many thousands of models of schools we've out there and say, well, this is the one thing we can say that we know is true. All schools need to X. Good luck. But I'm not sure. That's even a worthy enterprise to try. I also think this, and this is where the sort of the political side of all of this stuff comes out at me, which is that we actually do know how to fix what's wrong in education. Because the fact of the matter is that there's lots of places in this country where schools are doing just fine. They may not be as progressive as they'd like. They may not be as technology as infused as they'd like. But they're good, healthy places where kids are doing well. We know, sadly, that most of those places are not in our cities. And when we talk about the crisis in education, what we're really talking about, when we talk about the real crisis, is we're talking about urban education. And if we want to change urban education, there's a couple things we can do. It's not just school size, it's teaching load. Great to make schools 500 instead of 2,000. Brilliant, wonderful, a huge step in the right direction. But if teachers still have 150 kids on their roster, if they're still teaching 5 classes at 45 minutes a day and expected to do that, if you're an 11th grade English teacher, and you teach 150 kids, 165 kids is the maximum that you would do on your roster here in Philadelphia. Just do the math. How many 10-page papers can you have them write in a year? It's just not possible. How many teachers, after teaching, 7 hours a day where they had one prep and a 40-minute lunch, can go home and realistically read 1,000, 1,500 student pages? It's not going to happen. So we regress to the mean. We regress to matching tests. We regress to measuring our learning by multiple choice tests. Why? Not because these teachers are bad people, not because they should be demonized, not because they don't care, but because there aren't enough hours in the day. We want to change education. We want teachers. I mean, Larry Cuban said this 10 years ago. Teachers use, 10 years ago he was writing that teachers were using email in their home lives, that teachers were connected at home, that teachers were actually, of all of the professions in this country, some of the most powerful early adopters in their private lives of technology. Why wasn't it in the school? Because there wasn't time. Let's get teaching loads under 100. Let's have teachers teaching fewer classes and planning more, and giving them time to collaborate, and giving them time to think, and giving them time to assess authentically, so we're not stuck looking at multiple choice tests. Do that, and we will change education. And we could. It's not that expensive. But we won't, because there's not the will. It's okay to do it in the suburbs. Look how many kids are on a teacher's roster in the suburbs. I have a friend who taught with me at Beacon, where we taught 33 kids in a class. He's in Summit, New Jersey now. His biggest class is 24. It makes a huge difference.
So what I hear you saying is, really at the heart of this is the pedagogy and the willingness to do what needs to be done so that teachers can have time to interact with the students.
Yeah, that's right.
And the technologies, the new technologies, the Web 2.0 technologies, let's say the read-write web technologies.
Will, thank you for that.
Yes. These significantly have the opportunity to enhance that interaction and expand
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, I mean, before you called, I was IMing with 3 students, just talking about the work they had to do, talking about some of the problems they were having in one of their classes and what they needed to do to get themselves back on track at 9:45 at night. And I guarantee you I wasn't the only teacher at SLA doing that. But we dance around the edges of real school reform in our cities until we fund our city schools. It would take, I did the math on this last year, because we're going to announce, one of the things that we want to do at SLA is create an endowment for SLA to be able to bring class size down and teacher load down. And we're going to launch, hopefully in the next year, a $20 million endowment campaign. I have no idea if we can do it. It's a pipe dream perhaps, but it's a hell of a pipe dream to have. The frightening thing is this. We could raise $20 million, which would bring in conservatively about $1 million more into the school, which would be about $2,000 more per student when we're at our 500 max. It still would not put us anywhere close to the most well-funded districts in the suburbs right outside of Philadelphia. Strathaven spends Philadelphia spends about $9,000 per student according to last year's Philadelphia Inquirer schools report. Strathaven spends somewhere in the neighborhood, I believe, of $14,000 or $15,000 per kid. Alfie Kohn is right when he says, I will believe that money does not matter in education when rich people stop spending so much of it on it. We have to fund our city schools. One of the things that drives me crazy about SLA right now, one of the things that scares me about the sustainability of SLA is we just lost 175 positions in central office in Philadelphia. Several of the people that we lost their jobs are people that were absolutely critical to the starting of SLA and that were on our planning committee and worked side by side with us to really build this school. And they lost their jobs. That was last month. That's the reality. We need to fund our city schools. Then we can see some of this stuff happen. These are good people I see working in Philadelphia, and they get demonized all the time that, urban education doesn't work. Well, there are very few people in this world who would want the job conditions that these folks have, especially when they go into it with the most noble of intentions. Look at the article in the New York Times about KIPP. KIPP, how does KIPP raise scores? They work their teachers 15, 16 hours a day. What's the average? The question that the New York Times magazine article hinted at but didn't really speak was, what's the average work span of a KIPP teacher? 4 years. And then they burn out and go. Why shouldn't the model be 15 kids in those classes? That if you're coming from an urban district, if you're coming from abject poverty, if you've got 100% free lunch classrooms, why aren't there double the number of teachers to make sure that we are actually trying to address the generational effects of poverty? Why are we funding our city schools less than we're funding our suburban schools? And again, I'll get off my soapbox now, and you can ask whatever next question you'd like.
No, it's almost 11 o'clock your time. Wait a minute. Yes, that's right. It's almost 11 o'clock your time. So I'm going to give you one last chance to be in your soapbox. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about before we give you a chance to finish your night up?
Everything. I think the thing to remember is with all of this, and to end on a hopeful note, because I really am an optimist at the end of the day. I don't think I could have done this job if I wasn't. The kids are all right, They are capable of amazing things. They are capable of inspiring us every day. They are capable of humbling us every day. They are capable of making us laugh and cry often in the same moment. And they're capable of things that we as the adults are not. We need to build schools that embrace that. We need to build schools that allow them to engage as richly in our ever-changing world as we possibly can. We'll never have enough money in our schools. We'll never be on the, we'll never have as much cool stuff to play with in a public school as they've got up at the MIT Media Lab. But that should be our dream. We should create places again of rigorous passion and maybe even rigorous fun. God forbid kids want to go to school. We have had so many parents come to us in our first year at SLA and say, I don't know what you're doing, but my child for the first time in their life bounds out of bed and can't wait to get to school. Our school doesn't start till 8:15, but the kids are already there at 7:30. We throw them out at the end of the day at 6 o'clock. If we create communities where kids feel valued, where their experiences matter, where the things that they can do outside of school are mirrored inside of school, where we don't allow ourselves to be governed by fear but rather by hope, our kids will blow us away with what they can do. And that's what's needed. It is at the end of the day, again, it's not the technology, it's the pedagogy. It's the belief in the power of our ideas and their ideas, not a belief in fear. If we can do that, we will change our schools and we will change our society and we will do it for the better. And I guess the only other piece on the soapbox is, to that end, we need to stop thinking that schools, the job of schools is to create the 21st century workforce. It's not. The job of our schools is nothing less than to create the 21st century, to help create the 21st, co-create, I guess, the 21st century citizen. We want our kids to be active, engaged citizens of the world. They'll be workers if they're that too. That part will take care of itself. We want them to be able to engage in the world around them and make it better. That, nothing less than that is our task as educators.
Chris, thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.